Hello everyone, I am Linn Elisabet and I'm a music producer. I moved to Berlin about a year ago to refine my sound engineering skills, but before that I used to live in Stockholm and teach in music production in the producer program Vem Kan Producent, which translates into Who Can Become a Producer in English. The project is separatistic, so it's for female and transgender producers. And the initiative comes from the NGO Popkollo, which also arranges summer camps for girls and transgender kids who want to become better at their musical skills. If you live in Sweden, we have producer programs in Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. But if you do not live in Sweden, we are honored to let you know that we will be putting up some tutorials here on YouTube during the rest of 2020. And I am not alone. With me, I've got 3 other super talented tutors from Gothenburg and Malmö, and we're all going to share with you like our best tips and tricks within our production fields. So today I planned for us to talk a little bit about my mixdown process. And my musical project, Linn Elisabet, is mainly into what I want to call alternative dance music. Some people want to call it techno, but I don't want to limit myself to that. So if you're making dance music, this tutorial is definitely something for you. But I am pretty sure that even though you're into some other genre, that you could get something out of this tutorial. So without further ado, I suggest that we jump in. So today I was thinking I would show you an upcoming track of mine, which is going to be released on my label. It's called Fakot Ardiat Made to Burn. And I thought it was like a good example of how I am working, because believe it or not, I'm doing it a little bit differently each time, which I'm also going to show you because there are a couple of things that are lacking in here. But yes, first of all, I think it would be a good idea to have a listen to the track, right? So let's do that. Jump a bit forward so that you hear the breakdown and the drop. Alright, so that's a sneak peek into what's going on in this track. And now I'm going to guide you through the process of how I mixed it. So, as you see here, I have my groups like beautifully labeled and colored and sorted into different categories. I have my kick group, my high group, my vocal group, and then I have this bass dist mix bus that I'm going to show you a bit later how it works. You also can see here that I've got no MIDI, everything is in audio, and that's because I make sure to resample or bounce the individual tracks into audio. This is for me to gain better control because there are not like a big amount of plugins that are working. You get a better summarizing of all the tracks and you're saving CPU on the computer. But beyond the technical aspects of this, I also enjoy the feeling of commitment because when you are doing this individual stems or resampling thing, you're kind of moving beyond the production and sound design phase into a true mixdown phase, and you're able to focus on just that. Also, you get a lot like cleaner workspace for when it is time to do more surgical adjustments. And I can show you actually. This is like the old tracks, the old individual tracks, and you see there's some MIDI here going on, and also a lot of plugins. So before we dive into this properly, I will just let you know that I do a lot of my mixing in the production process because I find it helps me a lot with the sound design. You will note that a lot of my individual tracks here are at 0 dBFS because in the mixdown process of this track I found that they were already fairly well leveled. But I will still show you how I approach the leveling aspect of the mixdown. So let's get into the leveling part. I have soloed the kick group and let's have a listen. As you see when it plays, we are having a peak, it's hitting around minus 10 dBFS. And I find this to be a very good guideline because especially within dance music, the kick drum is the foundation of the track, most often the most important element that needs to be in the front of the mix and just slam it. So I make sure that the kick drum hits at around minus 10 because I know that this will give me enough headroom in the end if I level the other elements correctly. And as you see internally, I have already set the levels here. So we're not going to go that deep at this point, but I'm going to show you how I would mix in the other elements. So now I choose the second most important element, and in this case I would say that it is the vocals. So I put it down and I solo it, and then I tune it in and just listen until it hits a point where I find the balance is nice. Funny thing now is that I felt that it was enough at like minus 2, and in my final mixdown I had it at 0. Let's see here. And here I also already set like the individual levels between the tracks, but I do that with the same method. Like I choose the most important channel and I set that to a nice level, and then I mix all the other channels around it. So let's do the same with the hi-hats. Nice. And then we have this bass dist mix bus that I really like to show you. Okay, so the bass dist mix bus, as I call it, is a channel that I am using to give the bass a little bit more character and to push through in the mix. And if we're listening to it solo, you're gonna hear that it sounds a bit weird. It actually sounds quite horrible soloed. Uh, but don't fear, because it's going to sound like really, really good together with the other elements. So what I did was that I took the elements of the track which are like fundamental for the bass. And in this case, I don't really have a bass line, but the kick is already filling up so much of the frequency spectrum. So I soloed all the kick elements and resampled them into a new channel. Then I put one of my absolute favorite plugins. It's the FabFilter Saturn. I got it in the end of all my effects chains to give everything a little bit more overtones and like to make it pop out in the mix. Usually then I use like a tube or a tape preset, but for this one I choose Rectify, which is like a super harsh one. So I have it also like on the lowest. Sometimes I even put like the mix of wet and dry a little bit less than 100% because it can become too much. You have to listen and see for yourself what works for you. So I put this one first. Then I have a compressor which is side chaining against the kick drum, so that every time the kick drum hits, it's going to duck a bit around it, so that they do not interfere in the mix with each other. And you also get this kind of nice like sucking sound that comes afterwards, which also gives it like more character. And then I have EQ'd this one as well. I don't usually do that. Sometimes I do that because I want to like bring out the character of a certain part of the sound. And I found the distortion here to be like super yummy. I also took away a little bit in the bass because I felt like it interfered still too much with the kick drum, even though I had already side chained it. And then last but not least, I have a utility plugin where I flicked the phase, because this is a common problem like when you're mixing kick and bass, or like mixing in bass in general, that you might get cancellations, phase cancellations, because the information from the computer, which is like we're actually coding here when we're making music, how speakers are going to move. And the information from the computer tells the speakers to move in two opposite directions at the same time, which they cannot physically do. So that's when you get phase cancellations. So I flicked the phase here in order to make sure that this one is doing its job to give more bass and not less. And then when I mix it in, I usually mix it in like kind of shyly, and the sidechain is also like quite harsh, because this is not going to be a sound of its own, it's just going to bring character. So let's listen to what it actually does in here. I soloed the kick drum again. And now I'm going to mix in the bass dist mix bus in the same way as I mixed in the other elements. It's like super subtle, and I hope you're able to hear it now, although we don't have the best playback relation between my voice and the sounds. But yes, it does like fill out and lift up the bass quite nicely. Now that we have done the basic leveling, I'd just like to show you like a bit of visual aid and how to interpret that. The most important thing is, of course, that you listen It also, of course, depends on what kind of environment that you are able to do your mixdowns in. If you cannot access like a nice high-end, very well acoustically treated studio, like most of us, or I've been lucky to have that kind of access. But also a lot of the times I am doing the basic mixing at home, and I live in an apartment where I cannot really get the ultimate acoustic treatment. So I am using visual aids just to have a look at what's going on, and if what I interpret like as correct in my ears actually is that accurate. So this is the pass analyzer from Waves. Here you can see where the kick drum is working, the sub bass, the more punchy part of it. Here's our mid register with the vocals, and then we have the highs. And one good thing to look out for here is that you want kind of 3 little mountains or hills in your curve, where the bass is the highest, then comes the high frequencies as the next to highest point, and then the mids. And I see here that we could use a little bit more highs for sure in this mix. But yeah, overall it looks kind of good, and I feel like the basic leveling is done. I am not too critical at this point because we are going to do some other adjustments as well, but it's going to be easier to do those fine-tuning adjustments if we have a nice leveling to start off with. So at this stage, I am usually doing something that I am calling cleaning, and by cleaning I am meaning like EQing out unnecessary frequencies from certain instruments, sidechaining, and making like EQ pockets for the different elements not to interfere too much with each other. A good example here on the kick drum is how I created these 2 pockets in order for the sub bass to push through a little bit more prominently. Because if there is too much going on above the sub bass, it will affect the possibility for the sub bass to push forward and be audible. All of this is physics and like, yeah, the speaker's ability to move in a certain way. So make sure that there's not like too much going on in the higher bass, but also like in the lower mids. You hear it again here. It just, yeah, starts to lack a lot. And I only added 1 dB here in the sub, but here I actually removed quite a lot. So that makes a lot of difference. Another good example is like on the vocals here, where I cut away the lower frequencies as to not interfere with the kick drum, because we don't need this choir to be singing under 150 hertz for sure. So yeah, go through all the different channels and make sure that there are some corrections done where a sound doesn't take more space in the mix than it actually needs to be done. But be careful so that you're not cutting away too much, because sometimes you might like as an instinct feel that the most classical one is like with the snares. Your instinct is that it contains a lot of frequencies in the treble, and then people cut away way too much bass, and you just lose the entire character of the instrument. So be sure that you are not like only doing this EQ isolation in solo, but to also listen to it in relation to the other tracks. And be careful as to not cutting away too much free. Once all your cleaning is done, we can start adding things. And by adding things, I mean like, okay, listen a bit to what's going on. Is anything missing? Listen to each individual sound, what makes its beauty, enhance it if needed so that each sound can just glow in all its splendor. And if something is lacking, like clarity or punch, I tend to use parallel compression or transient design. In this track, I've got quite a simple parallel compression setup, one for the highs and the clarity and one for the lows and punch. But not to worry, there will be a video on compression too later on to dive a bit deeper into that. Once I've done the cleaning and the additions, so always cleaning first as to make space for the additions, we have changed the frequency spectrum somewhat, and we need to set all the levels again. So I take the same approach as I showed you in the beginning, starting off with the kick drum and then mixing in all the elements together with that. Last but not least then, I'd like to talk a little bit about the mix bus. And like I told you previously in this video, there are some things from my regular scheme lacking in this track, and this is exactly where that comes applied, because on this track I did not do a lot on the mix bus in the computer. I actually did most of that in analog gear. What I've done here is just like cutting off the bass in stereo so that all the bass is just in mono. But else I did things like saturation and EQing on analog gear. This was because I wanted to bring the analog feel into a track which is quite digitally based. But usually if I do it on the computer, I have a lot more going on here, and I'm going to show you that on another track. So on this track I've been doing a little bit more on the mix bus in the actual computer. We have the same thing as in the previous track, where I make sure that the sub bass is mono. But then I'm also using one of my favorite plugins, the Decapitator from Soundtoys. It's a distortion plugin, and this setting is fairly harsh, but I have made sure to dial it in quite shyly, so it's like quite dry signal still. I do this to glue the sounds together, get a bit of overtones and a bit more character to the overall sound. Make sure though, when you're using this type of plugins, that you get the same output level as input level, because it will be a lot more difficult for you to decide if it actually sounds better if the output level is higher than the input, since the sounds we perceive as louder are most often also perceived as better. So make sure that that setting is quite right. Then I also have this infected mushroom pusher, and to be fair with you, I am not sure what it is doing. In the description it says something in the style of like adding the infected mushroom magical mixing sauce. But I find it shapes especially like the mid-range really nicely. Sometimes it affects the kick drum too much though, so I'm keeping it out of the mix bus and just put it on a group where I have put all the melodic materials. But on this one it worked to have it on the mix bus. Now we've gone through the basics in my mixdown process, and once you feel like you're done, check the mix on different mediums, like different headphones, speakers, in a car, if you have the chance in a club, because most often it translates quite differently onto a big public address system. Then I have this like final tip that I want to give you, and it is dare to trust your ears. Because now we've been going through a lot of different techniques, and it might seem a bit square when it comes to mixing. Also, you find a lot of like rules going on, like you can only do this, you can only do that, and the rules are there for a reason, because we're working with physical mediums, even though we feel like we're in the computer, right? But sometimes what is considered wrong is what sounds the best. And if you are in a situation where you feel this is occurring to you, then just dare to trust your ears, because that's how we innovate in this field. I've been so very happy to have you with me during this little session. We will be putting up videos once a week until the end of the year. I hope you enjoyed it and that we will see you back again.